Every government in America is saying we're short of money. And rather than saying, and we can make it through because we've decided to smartly budget the money we have left, you would think that when a government is offered some money, that it would say, why, we'd be glad to take that. I think the rule should be just say thank you. But AL.com is reporting that the Church of Highlands in Birmingham, Alabama, provides free mentoring and community support groups and faith and health and social service activities at the Housing Authority of Birmingham's 9 public housing communities. The church didn't get a dime for all that service, but had an agreement to allow its volunteers at the facilities. Well, the next day, the Birmingham Board of Education canceled its leases for the church to use local high schools for worship services. I wanted to find out what was going on here and why they would look a gift horse in the mouth. Zack Smith joins me now, who's with the Heritage Foundation as a legal fellow. Zack, welcome back to the program.
Thanks so much for having me on, Lars. I really appreciate it.
So what is going on here, and why doesn't the city of Birmingham just say thank you for all the help that it's getting from the Church of Highlands?
So this is one of the most troubling stories we've seen come out of the coronavirus epidemic lately. Essentially what happened, the pastor of the Church of the Highlands liked a couple of tweets that Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA posted on Twitter. Somebody saw those likes and wrote a Facebook post about it, complaining about the fact that the pastor liked those posts. And so what happened, school officials saw it, housing authority officials saw that complaint, and the school board terminated the contracts it had with the church, allowing them to hold worship services in high school gymnasiums. And the housing authority basically turned away free medical services for its neediest community members, all because these government officials did not like the speech, the Twitter like, that this pastor in Birmingham liked on Twitter.
Well, I like Charlie, and I like Turning Point, and I don't find their content to be that high. I mean, I could imagine, I guess, Zach, you know, if I was going to think as broadly as possible, and I try to, I could imagine circumstances where if somebody came and said, we want to do advertising on the Lars Larson show, there are two things I turn down right now, pot and porn. We just don't do business with those people. And that's a qualitative choice on my part. But the idea that you don't like political statements, I mean, stuff that's pretty conventional, you might not agree with somebody's politics, but does that make them so highly offensive that you begin treating them like pariahs?
But here's the important thing, Lars. There's a big difference between you as Lars Larson and the Lars Larson show disagreeing with somebody and refusing to do business with them versus government officials taking those same actions. And so even though the posts that the pastor liked weren't particularly offensive, that's really besides the point, because essentially what happened here is you have government officials punishing somebody because they didn't like the speech or the positions he took. That's a violation of the First Amendment and should trouble all of us when we're to the point of government officials retaliating against somebody because they don't like what they have to say.
Well, Zach, since you're a legal guy and I'm not a legal guy, I try to study the Constitution as much as I can. I thoroughly agree with your point on that. Wasn't there a case not too many years ago where there was a group that wanted to you drive down the road and you see a sign that says this section of the highway has been cleaned up by XYZ group. It can be a private company. It can even be an individual. It can be a social club like the Eagles or the Elks or the Moose. And I think in this case, it was actually, believe it or not, one of the very few KKK chapters in America. And they said they wanted to do the highway cleanup. And I think the state in that case was saying, well, we don't want to do that because we don't like them. And I think they ended up losing in court on that one, saying that the group could still do it. I mean, there could be lots of groups. I don't like Planned Parenthood, and I don't like them being in the schools. But that's not a speech issue. That's more involved with their actual activities, in providing abortions. But you're right. If a government can say, we can pick and choose based on whether or not we, the people in the government, like the message or not, then that is government making choices that are First Amendment based.
Absolutely. And what you don't want to have happen is the government discriminating against individuals based on their viewpoints, the content of their speech, just because a government official has a different viewpoint. And so what we've traditionally seen in this area is once the government opens up a space, like a high school gymnasium, to allow individuals to host events or public events, they basically can't turn someone away simply because they don't like their viewpoint or what they have to say. Now, government officials are certainly free to disagree with those views. They're certainly entitled to take appropriate precautions to protect everyone who may attend those events. But what they cannot do is punish somebody or refuse to provide services to somebody simply because of their views. And so really that is a First Amendment violation, and it certainly seems like a case that would be worthwhile for the Alabama Attorney General, Steve Marshall, to investigate, or even for the Department of Justice in Washington, Bill Barr and Eric Dreibend of the Civil Rights Division to take an interest in and look into exactly what happened in this case.
Well, and in fact, Zach, as a legal fellow, you can probably tell me the technical answer. Wouldn't it be incumbent for you to look to the nearest solution rather than go straight to, say, the federal solution, that you'd look to see whether or not your state authorities would take action on this first before you have to appeal to, say, William Barr?
You could, absolutely. But, Lars, it would be perfectly appropriate for both the federal government and the state government to look into this, because the First Amendment provides protections under the federal Constitution. And so, throughout this coronavirus pandemic, we've seen the Department of Justice, Bill Barr, Eric Dreibend, aggressively protecting the rights of Americans. We've seen disparate treatment of religious communities, churches, not being allowed to open on the same level as other businesses and activities. And they've taken a very aggressive and very appropriate stance against those types of discriminatory regulations. And in a lot of ways, this, too, is a very troubling development where, again, government is punishing somebody because they didn't like their speech.
Hey, let me ask, since I've got your ear for a moment, Zach, and it's free legal advice anyway, I'd like to ask, I'd like to put one in front of you that's been troubling me. I happen to, my home studios, I live in Vancouver, Washington, but usually my studios are in Portland, but I've been working from the home studio because we've been trying to keep everybody safe. And my producers have been working at home for the most part as well. The state government of Oregon, the legislature, just allocated $62 million, and this is out of some of the federal CARES money, but they allocated it specifically for black individuals who've been adversely affected by coronavirus, by the the COVID and the lockdown and everything else. Is that legal? Is that constitutional? And can a government, because now the Congress is about to do the same kind of thing. I think Schumer's got a bill going for coronavirus relief, but he wants to make it race specific. Can that possibly be legal and constitutional?
Well, Lars, I haven't looked closely at the bill you're talking about or the issue that's being proposed by the legislature there. But, any time that government proposes to treat someone differently based on a protected characteristic, race, gender, because of someone's ethnicity or their religion, alarm bells go off, and rightly so. And so those types of legislative proposals, again, certainly need to be looked at carefully. And again, would certainly seem like a worthwhile endeavor for the Department of Justice to look into and be sure that all appropriate laws and constitutional protections are being applied.
I mean, look, Zach, I'd be the first to admit, if you said we've got a special government program to build ramps at corners so that people in wheelchairs can use them, that's specific to somebody with a disability, but it's because they have a specific need. If you said we're going to have a special program for pap smears for women, well, of course, it doesn't apply to men, but that's okay because it's built into the problem that the problem is not a problem for men. If it was a grant of money to study sickle cell anemia, it benefits a particular group, but only because of medicine and biology, not because you've said we only want these dollars to go to people with one skin color and not to people with a different skin color. And I think that's dead wrong. But, Zach, I always appreciate you coming on the program. Thanks so much.